Introduction. Love him or hate him, he has been at the center of U.S. politics for the past 8 years. His face is on a commemorative Jewish temple coin, and now, he's come back. But yet there is a prophetic chain that points to his second occupancy of the White House. Herein, we unravel the prophetic chain that brings him back to the topmost perch in the U.S. The teaching that the world is experiencing a series of prophetic seasons that began in 2019 and will last until 2025 and will then be followed by a world war is traced to a little-known African digital ministry called the St. Dowdy Ministries. The ministry that was launched in 2015 exists only in the digital domain. In 2018, the ministry established Dowdy Global as a dedicated prophetic platform and then began announcing the prophetic seasons in January of each year starting in 2019. This can be verified on the Dowdy Global Facebook page. But the number 7 is also loaded with biblical significance, marking important times and seasons. 2 7-year periods appear in the story of Joseph, where he interprets Pharaoh's dream and reveals God's plans for ancient Egypt. We thus believe that God still employs the 7-year pattern for his purposes. Listen along and hear for yourself. Node 1, 2019, Prophetic Exit. The first node in the 7-year prophetic chain was marked by a fire. Why this prophetic chain began in 2019 is a story for another book that is set to follow this one. But it all concerns Israel and the end times season. The year 2019 was a year of exit. In prophetic terms, an exit signals that a threshold has been reached in the spiritual realm. The world was ripe for a series of prophetic seasons, and 2019 marked that start. Exits happened on all levels to those who were prepared or listened to the prophets, and Dowdy Global proclaimed this year as soon as it begun. The key exit event in this first prophetic season was the Notre Dame Cathedral fire that brought an exit to 1,000 years of history with the destruction of the cathedral's roof. The devastating fire broke out on April 15, 2019, at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, one of the most iconic Gothic structures in the world, a symbol of French and European culture. The fire started in the attic beneath the cathedral's roof, known as the forest, due to its age-old wooden framework. It quickly spread, causing significant damage. The fire resulted in the collapse of the cathedral's famous spire, extensive destruction of the roof, and damage to the upper walls. Fortunately, the stone vaults below the roof largely prevented the fire from spreading to the interior of the cathedral, which helped to preserve much of its valuable artwork, religious relics, and treasures. The cause of the fire was believed to be accidental, possibly linked to renovation work being done at the time. The event deeply impacted people worldwide, leading to widespread mourning and a massive international fundraising effort for restoration. French President Emmanuel Macron vowed to rebuild Notre Dame, and efforts to restore it to its former glory have been ongoing since the fire. Macron remarked, "Notre Dame is our history, it's our literature, it's our imagery. It's the place where we live our greatest moments, from wars to pandemics to liberations." What an ominous saying from the French statesman, for Notre Dame would not be a place to live the 2020 COVID-19 global pandemic, 2021 Taliban liberation of Afghanistan, and 2022 Russia-Ukraine war. The devastating 2019 fire at Notre Dame Cathedral led to an emotional exit from the unbroken continuity of an iconic French cultural and religious symbol. The event marked a departure from its historic intactness and spurred debates about how to restore it. But it was in the burning and collapse of the spire and roof that the exit prophetic motif was clearly captured. British Society of Architects remarked, "The loss of the roof and spire of Notre Dame, and possibly the stone vault too, is an irreplaceable blow to the heritage of French Gothic architecture. The spire and roof may have been reconstructed, but their destruction marked a point of exit, a loss that was indeed irreplaceable." This fire would mark the first in a series of prophetic events of worldwide impact, each occurring in its season or year. God had begun communicating to the world, and he started by bringing down the lofty roof of a worship place in Europe, the very continent where the Romans, crucifiers of Christ, had their seat, and where the early church later expanded to and infiltrated the heart of the Roman Empire. God purposely selected an iconic church building at the heart of Europe, the Notre Dame Cathedral. But why France? Well, look for that in the book, Nuclear Visitation. Node 2, 2020, Prophetic New Beginnings. The second node in the 7-year prophetic chain was marked by a new virus. But 2020 was also a season of new beginnings. On the first day of 2020, Dowdy Global proclaimed a prophetic year of new beginnings on its Facebook page. The ministry lauds this announcement as pivotal to its prophetic credentials since the coronavirus, which caused a series of new beginnings by altering life across the globe in 2020 and beyond, had not been named nor even declared a pandemic by January 1, 2020. 2020 was a year of new beginnings, and the key event in that year was the beginning of a new virus. COVID-19, caused by the COVID-19 virus, had a profound global impact since its emergence in late 2019. The pandemic affected nearly every aspect of life worldwide: health, economies, societies, and geopolitics. Over 770 million people were infected globally, with millions of deaths reported by late 2023. Healthcare systems in many countries were overwhelmed, leading to shortages of medical supplies, ventilators, and hospital beds. Long-term COVID effects affected many survivors, causing chronic health issues like fatigue, respiratory problems, and cognitive impairments. Economies shrank, with the global economy contracting by 3.5% in 2020. Unemployment and poverty surged as lockdowns, travel restrictions, and business closures became widespread. Supply chains were severely disrupted, leading to shortages in goods and increased prices. Social impact: governments imposed lockdowns, quarantines, and social distancing, leading to isolation, mental health issues, and shifts in how people lived and worked. Remote work and virtual learning became the norm for many industries and education systems. Large gatherings, including cultural, sports, and religious events, were cancelled or postponed. But the pandemic also led to a first-time global collaboration on vaccine development, resulting in the creation of effective vaccines within a year. But global disparities quickly appeared as wealthier nations secured large vaccine supplies early on, while many lower-income countries struggled to access vaccines, prolonging the pandemic in certain regions. And yet public trust in science and governments was polarized, with misinformation and political divides causing resistance to public health measures and vaccines in some countries. Overall, COVID-19 was a key mark of the season of new beginnings as it reshaped how societies function, ushering in long-lasting changes in public health policies, global cooperation, and everyday life. On the other side, 2020 was the start of a new 60-year cycle on the Chinese calendar. In essence, this was a point of new beginning. And as we have seen, the coronavirus rewrote how societies function. China, where the virus was first reported, also witnessed the first of new rules upon societies in effort to control the virus. In early January 2020, Chinese President Xi Jinping ordered requirements for the prevention and control of the novel, new, coronavirus pneumonia. This novel or new virus would mark the second in a series of prophetic events of worldwide impact, each occurring in its season or year. God was continuing his communication to the world as the deadly new virus swept across the world. He purposely selected the city of Wuhan, deep in China. But why China? Well, look for that in the book, Nuclear Visitation. Node 3, 2021, Prophetic Persecution. The third node in the 7-year prophetic chain was marked by an emblem of persecution. 2021 was a season of prophetic persecution. On the first day of 2021, Dowdy Global proclaimed a prophetic year of persecution on its Facebook page. 8 months later, the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan to leave in place an enduring emblem of persecution, the Taliban. The U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021 had far-reaching effects on global geopolitics, regional security, humanitarian conditions, and the credibility of Western interventions. After nearly 20 years of military involvement, the rapid pullout left significant consequences for both Afghanistan and the international community. The Afghan government collapsed quickly after U.S. forces left, and the Taliban swiftly took control of Kabul on August 15, 2021. This led to widespread fears over human rights, especially for women and ethnic minorities. The Taliban is synonymous with persecution, and its reappearance to power in 2021 after 2 decades was a clear mark of a prophetic season of persecution. But American withdrawal was widely seen as chaotic and poorly managed, damaging the U.S.'s global reputation. Allies questioned America's reliability, while adversaries like China and Russia viewed the withdrawal as a sign of declining U.S. influence. Some NATO allies felt blindsided by the speed of the U.S. exit, which complicated joint efforts to secure and stabilize Afghanistan. The event strained transatlantic relations, though not irreparably. The withdrawal reflected the Biden administration's desire to end, forever wars, and refocus U.S. efforts on strategic competition with China and Russia, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. The withdrawal provided opportunities for China and Russia to increase their influence in Central Asia. China has sought to stabilize its western borders, especially concerning its Belt and Road Initiative, while Russia has increased security ties with Central Asian states. The U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan left the region unstable, and the full consequences will likely unfold over time. It underscored the limits of military power in reshaping nations and highlighted the complex dynamics of counterterrorism, state building, and global governance. The connection between the withdrawal and persecution has been shown by the rise of Taliban. However, there are other things of note. A former asylum officer with U.S. Department of Homeland Security wrote that, on January 11, 2021, the U.S. Departments of Homeland Security and Justice added a new definition of persecution for the first time to their respective regulations. This means that the concept of persecution was revised in relation to the U.S. immigration rules. The U.S. prides itself as a shelter for the persecuted. In this regard, President Biden remarked in February 2021, "We offered safe havens for those fleeing violence or persecution." And yet later that year, the U.S. left thousands of Afghans who had served U.S. interests to face persecution at the hands of the Taliban. What a prideful U.S.! But God was continuing to communicate to the world in the return to power of the notorious persecutors, the Taliban. He purposed that Kabul would fall as the U.S. took to their heels out of Afghanistan. But why the U.S.? Well, look for that in the book, Nuclear Visitation. Node 4, 2022, Prophetic Power. The fourth node in the 7-year prophetic chain was marked by prophetic power display. It was so declared because of the prophesied rise of a unique power dynamic that would affect the world. But 2022 being the middle of the 7-year prophetic season also saw a double side to the prophetic times. As such, power went with healing. On the first day of 2022, Dowdy Global proclaimed a prophetic year of unprecedented power and healing on its Facebook page. But it was the power that reverberated more throughout the world. In the following month, Russia invaded Ukraine, leading to profound implications for geopolitical power and the rise of a multipolar world order. Here's a more specific look at how this event has shaped the global landscape. Russia's assertiveness. Russia's invasion demonstrated its willingness to use military force to assert its geopolitical interests. This has led to increased tensions with Western countries and a re-evaluation of security policies in Europe and beyond. Western response. NATO and the EU have strengthened their defense and security measures in response to the invasion. This includes increased military spending, enhanced military presence in Eastern Europe, and support for Ukraine. Global alliances. The invasion has prompted countries to reassess their alliances. Some nations have moved closer to Western powers, while others have sought to balance their relationships with both sides. Rise of new power centers. The invasion has highlighted the growing influence of countries like China, India, and Brazil. These nations have taken more prominent roles in global affairs, advocating for a multipolar world order. Economic impact. The conflict has disrupted global energy markets, leading to economic shifts. Countries are seeking alternative energy sources and supply chains, which has altered global trade patterns. Geopolitical tensions. The invasion has increased geopolitical tensions, particularly between the West and Russia. This has led to a more fragmented and competitive global landscape, with countries aligning based on strategic interests. International institutions, the United Nations and other international organizations have faced challenges in addressing the conflict and maintaining global stability. The need for a robust multilateral framework has become more apparent. Security concerns. The invasion has raised concerns about regional and global security. The potential for escalation and the use of nuclear weapons has become a significant worry. Humanitarian impact. The conflict has caused immense human suffering, with millions of people displaced and significant loss of life. This has prompted international humanitarian efforts and raised awareness of the need for conflict resolution and peace building. Economic consequences. The invasion has had a substantial economic impact, affected global markets, and led to increased economic uncertainty. Countries are adapting to these changes by seeking new economic partnerships and trade agreements. In summary, the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine has reshaped geopolitical power dynamics and highlighted the complexities of a multipolar world order. The conflict has led to increased competition, shifting alliances, and a more fragmented global landscape, requiring careful navigation of international relations to maintain stability and cooperation. Russian President Vladimir Putin mentioned the word power a day after the Russian special operation in Ukraine. On February 25, 2022, Vladimir Putin called on the Ukrainian military to take power into your own hands and overthrow the Ukrainian government. He suggested that it would be easier for Russia to negotiate with the Ukrainian military than with the current leadership. Putin's statement was an attempt to incite a coup within Ukraine, encouraging the military to seize control and replace the government. This was part of his broader strategy to destabilize Ukraine and install a more Russia-friendly regime, which he believed would be more amenable to Russian interests and easier to negotiate with. And yet, Putin's mention of power in reference to the Russian invasion of Ukraine answered the 2022 prophetic season of power. God was continuing to communicate to the world in the power dynamic between Russia and Ukraine, and ultimately in the ongoing reconfiguration of global power that began with the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. He purposed that Russia would invade Ukraine, which would then begin to reconfigure the global power balance. But why Russia? Well, look for that in the book, Nuclear Visitation. Node 5, 2023, Prophetic Vengeance. The fifth node in the 7-year prophetic chain was marked by a vengeance. The year 2023 was also a double-sided season with favor and its opposite, vengeance. On the first day of 2023, Dowdy Global proclaimed a prophetic year of favor or not on its Facebook page. But it was the other side of favor, the not favored or day of vengeance, that shook the world. This is in consistence with juxtaposition of favor and vengeance in Isaiah 61 verse 2. The October 2023 Hamas attack on Israel and the subsequent Israeli retaliation are stark examples of how vengeance can escalate conflicts. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a large-scale attack on Israel, resulting in significant casualties and hostilities. This attack was met with a swift and forceful response from Israel, which included airstrikes and ground operations in Gaza. Vengeance, or the desire for retribution, often plays a critical role in escalating conflicts. When one party feels wronged, they may seek to retaliate, which can lead to a cycle of violence. This cycle is evident in the ongoing conflict between Hamas and Israel. Hamas's attack on Israel was driven by long-standing grievances and a desire to inflict harm on their perceived enemy. Israel's response was fueled by a need to defend its citizens and seek retribution for the attack, leading to extensive military operations in Gaza. But each act of violence prompts further retaliation, creating a cycle of vengeance that is difficult to break. The concept of vengeance in international relations can lead to prolonged and intensified conflicts. It often results in increased casualties as each side seeks to avenge previous attacks. The number of casualties and the extent of destruction can escalate dramatically. Vengeance can deepen animosities and make it harder to achieve peace, as each side becomes more committed to their cause. Conflicts driven by vengeance can have far-reaching effects, drawing in other nations and impacting global stability. In summary, the October 2023 Hamas attack on Israel and the subsequent Israeli retaliation illustrate how vengeance can drive conflict escalation. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for finding ways to break the cycle of violence and work towards lasting peace. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu mentioned the word vengeance in his speech on October 7, 2023, following the Hamas attack on Israel. He vowed, "Mighty vengeance," against Hamas in response to the deadly assault. This statement underscored the intense emotions and the desire for retribution that often accompany such conflicts. And yet, Netanyahu's mention of vengeance was also prophetic as it answered the 2023 prophetic season of vengeance. But God was continuing to communicate to the world amidst Israel's vengeance on Hamas. He purposed that Hamas would launch an attack on Israel and that Israel would reply with a mighty vengeance. But why Israel? Well, look for that in the book, Nuclear Visitation. Node 6, 2024, Prophetic Bitterroots. The sixth node in the 7-year prophetic chain was marked by bitterroots. The year 2024 was also a third double-sided season with sweetness and its opposite, bitterroots. On the first day of 2024, Dowdy Global proclaimed a prophetic year of sweetness and bitterroots on its Facebook page. But it was the bitterroots that took on global headlines as decades-old bitterness buried between nations was unearthed. A prominent example was the Iranian attack on Israel that unearthed, for the first time ever, Iran's bitterness with Israel. This bitterness was expressed in the form of hundreds of Iranian ballistic missiles raining down upon Israel. But global events of greater prophetic significance rotated around the Korean peninsula, with the key player being North Korea. 3 significant events arose from the Korean peninsula in this prophetic season. In June 2024, North Korea and Russia signed a comprehensive defense pact, marking a significant shift in their relationship and signaling a deepening alliance amid rising global tensions. The agreement entails mutual military support, including a commitment for each country to assist the other if attacked. This development coincides with North Korea reportedly deploying thousands of troops to aid Russia in its conflict with Ukraine, adding manpower to Russia's front lines and intensifying the war effort against Ukraine. And then in October 2024, North Korea blew up sections of roads and rail lines connecting it to South Korea, escalating tensions significantly. This action came shortly after Pyongyang accused Seoul of flying drones over the North's capital, Pyongyang, to drop anti-regime leaflets, which North Korea framed as a hostile provocation. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un responded by ordering military actions, including demolitions along the Gyeongui and Donghae lines, previously symbolic links for inter-Korean cooperation. This move also aligns with North Korea's new stance of designating South Korea as its principal enemy. But the recent destruction of rail and road links by North Korea is deeply tied to historical animosity rooted in the Korean peninsula's division. This action reflects a long-standing, bitter root of distrust, a consequence of unresolved ideological, political, and security conflicts dating back to the Korean War. By severing these symbolic connections, North Korea is sending a powerful message that it views inter-Korean reconciliation as impossible under current circumstances, reigniting the perception of South Korea as an adversary and drawing from the unresolved tensions that continue to define their relationship. In the same way, the North Korea-Russia Defense Pact intensifies the bitterness between the two Koreas because it heightens South Korea's security concerns and solidifies North Korea's opposition to the South and its Western allies. This partnership enhances North Korea's access to military resources and international backing, allowing it to present a stronger threat to the South. The pact also symbolizes North Korea's willingness to align itself with Russia against Western-aligned countries like South Korea, further reinforcing ideological divides rooted in Cold War tensions. South Korea views this alliance as a direct challenge to regional stability, given that it strengthens North Korea's ability to act provocatively without fear of isolation. For example, with Russian backing, North Korea can conduct more missile tests and continue its military buildup without as much concern for diplomatic repercussions. This alliance evokes past Cold War dynamics when North Korea received support from the Soviet Union and China while South Korea allied with the United States, a divide that has never fully healed and continues to influence both nations' identities and defense policies. Additionally, North Korea's partnership with Russia underscores its rejection of cooperation with South Korea, particularly by bolstering its military stance instead of working toward inter-Korean reconciliation. This defense pact is a powerful statement that North Korea does not seek compromise with the South, adding to the bitter roots that make cooperation challenging. However, the mention of a prophetic term linked to the 2024 prophetic season occurred during the 2024 trash balloon campaign. North Korea began sending trash-filled balloons to South Korea on May 28, 2024. This campaign was a response to South Korean activists sending anti-North Korean leaflets across the border. About 5,000 trash balloons were sent by North Korea towards South Korea between May and September 2024. Kim Yo-jong, sister of Kim Jong-un and a prominent government spokeswoman, stated early July 2024 that South Korea would suffer a bitter embarrassment of picking up waste paper without rest, and it will be its daily work. As chief propagandist of North Korea, Kim Yo-jong's words answered the 2024 prophetic season that focused on North Korea. The military pact with Russia, which resulted into North Koreans' engagement in the Russia-Ukraine war, blowing up the road and rail connection with South Korea, and the trash balloon campaign all rotated around the Bitterroots on the Korean peninsula. All these prophetic events were encapsulated in that prophetic word that Kim Yo-jong spoke, bitter. And yet God was continuing to communicate to the world amidst North Korea's bitterness with South Korea. He purposed that North Korea would launch trash balloons, blow up infrastructure links, and enter a pact with Russia, all underpinned with decades of bitterness towards South Korea. But why North Korea? Well, look for that in the book, Nuclear Visitation. Node 7, 2025, Prophetic Return. The seventh and final node in the 7-year prophetic chain will be marked by return. The year 2025 is also the fullness of season, and will thus have a master and subjects. Alongside the main mark of return will be the 6 subjects: restitution, recompense, reclamation, revival, release, and renunciation. On the first day of 2024, Dowdy Global will proclaim a prophetic year of return and its accompanying 6 subjects. If you are reading this in 2025, then check out the Facebook page. One of the major prophetic events of 2025, the year of return, will be Trump's return to the White House in January 2025. This book has detailed the prophetic chain from 2019 to 2025, and so showed how Trump's return to Washington is part of the prophetic chain that ends in 2025. Other details that speak about Trump's pivotal role at the end of this 7-year prophetic period, and why he is the man for that season, will be dealt with in another book. But 2 key nations to watch next year are not in the Americas, Europe, or Middle East, but in Asia. This will be India, and specifically in its relation to Pakistan. These 2 nations are the only ones left to complete the 7-year prophetic period. But why India and Pakistan? Well, look for that in the book, Nuclear Visitation. The end. Thank you for listening. Maranatha.